Hey, AP Psychology, welcome to our very first lesson where we're going to get into exactly what psychology is and some of the modern perspectives of psychology and some former ones as well. So, before we get into all the perspectives, let's talk about what psychology actually is. And this is a long definition: the scientific study of behavior and mental processes and how they're affected by an organism's physical and mental state and external environment. That's a mouthful, but you really need to only focus on two terms here. It's the study of behavior and mental processes. And the question is, first off, what's a behavior? And then what's a mental process? A behavior is anything that can be observed, anything that a human does that can be seen by another human. So smiling, laughing, crying, sleeping, working, running, all of these are behaviors. And a mental process is anything that's happening that you cannot witness, that you cannot observe. So sadness. Sadness is a feeling. So any feeling is going to be a mental process. Anger, frustration. So yes, frustration could look like, but this right here, that's a behavior. The act of frustration is a mental process. So you can say like punching fist into hand or something. That's a behavior. And that maybe corresponds with anger or frustration or something. So let me say a few things and you try to guess whether it's going to be behavior or a mental process. Depression. It's a mental process. Sleeping all day. That's a behavior. Of course, those typically often go together when someone suffers from depression. What about attempting suicide? That's a behavior. What about embarrassed? That's a mental process. Because yes, blushing, you could say, is a behavior, but the act of being embarrassed, that's a mental process. And the whole reason that we're going to have both of these terms, my dog is sleeping right underneath me, and if you can hear him, he's readjusting his position. A behavior is really important because psychology is essentially a science, and science, there's experiments and there are things that need to be recorded for scientific purposes. I can't record someone depressed. I can't measure that, but I can measure like how often they cry. I can measure how often they sleep. I can measure how often they're eating, because behaviors is something observable that can be recorded, while mental processes cannot. Okay, so here are some big issues still with psychology today. We'll touch onto each of these throughout the course, but one of the big issues is stability versus change. Are we stable throughout our whole life in terms of intelligence, personality, emotional stability, or do we fluctuate? Do we change? Our intelligence, emotional stability, and our personality, can that change throughout its life? What about the next bullet point? Continuity versus discontinuity. And this is in terms of development. When we develop socially, when we develop sexually, cognitively, is that a continuous gradual process like going up an escalator? Or is it stages? Are, all 3-year-olds basically the same, or all 16-year-olds basically the same, or all 40-year-olds basically the same? Is it just like stages where, okay, now we're moving up to the next stage of development? And then the classic one of nature versus nurture. Who would we turn out more? Like the environment or biology? What has more influence on who we are? So nature, this is going to be biology. This is going to be like the sperm and the egg, and your DNA, your nature determined who you are. Or is it nurture? Is it how you are raised, the society you live in, the culture, who raised you specifically? Which one weighs more in terms of your personality, in terms of your intelligence, in terms of what foods you like? So we're going to talk about a little bit of all three of those. Obviously, It's a little bit of everything. There are some things that are stable. There's some things that change. There's some things are nature, some things are nurture. But we'll get into more when we get further into the course. Okay, let's talk about a little bit of history before we break into the perspectives of psychology. When we first were talking about like 1800s, 1700s, is like the beginnings of psychology, like what we now know as psychology. But we know that even back in the Middle Ages, uh, there was something happening in the psychological realm in the study of psychology, and we know that because there's evidence of something called trephination. Trephination is the cutting of holes into the skull to let evil spirits out. So maybe someone suffered from PTSD, or maybe they suffered from bipolar disorder or schizophrenia. We knew that there was something wrong with the head, but at the time, we thought it was demon possession, that you were possessed by evil spirits. And a way to fix you would be to release the spirits by cutting holes into their head. Okay, we now know that's ludicrous. We now know that's silly. It's chemical imbalances and many more things. But for a while, we were just drilling holes into people's skull. A little bit later, we got a little bit more scientific, but very little bit scientific. Phrenology. And this is studying the bumps on the skull. And so you see here, there's a map of a skull. Okay, keep in mind, this is not true. The skull is a bone. Bumps naturally are on bones, and it has nothing to do with like your personality. So at the time, we thought it did. So let's say number 2 is parental love. And so this is like the back of your skull right here. So the doctor would take like a little hammer and hammer the parts of the skull associating with a map of what was going on in your life and hoping to make you better. We now know that's not true. And it wasn't until 1879 that psychology finally became a science and less voodoo. And that started with Wilhelm Wundt. Wilhelm Wundt was German. He started the very first psychology lab, and he did the very first psychology experiments. And they were very, very rudimentary experiments. They were going to be, not all that scientific, but still he was replicating, he was recording the evidence, he then studied the data. So that's following the scientific method. But his experiments were like he would draw a circle on a piece of paper and then ask people how they felt about the circle. Or maybe he would drop a ball on a table and you had to respond to the sound. Like, okay, how did that sound make you feel? So this is the beginnings of how does that make you feel? So really quick question. If Wilhelm Wundt asked people, how does that make you feel? What are you thinking right now when you see this circle or this square? Does he care about behaviors or mental processes? Think about that very first definition. Psychology is the study of behavior or mental processes and mental processes. At the time, he only cared about one of those. And if he's asking you how you're feeling, then he's going to be caring about mental processes. Not like how you behave if you see a circle, or how you behave if you hear the ball drop on like a table or something. It's how does it make you feel? Does it make you feel nervous? Does it make you feel worried? Does it make you feel happy? What is it? He's all about mental processes. There's a link in the video right here. I'm not going to be able to play it right now because if I post this on YouTube with another video embedded in my video, that's breaking law. So I will post a link to it later. But so Wilhelm Wundt started psychology caring about mental processes. A little bit later, we're going to move on to this guy. Where'd it go? Okay. I had a separate page for him, but I don't know where his page went. We're not going to get into Ivan Pavlov now. We will later. Same thing with Freud. He will definitely pop up again and again. But I do want to talk about William James. William James is like Wilhelm Wundt's nemesis. They would not have gotten along. So Wilhelm Wundt, remember, how does a circle make you feel? Which, by the way, how does he make you feel is called introspection. If you think about thinking, if you are thinking about your thoughts, that's called introspection. You're being very introspective. If like, what are you thinking about? I don't know. I was just thinking about my thoughts and how I was feeling. That's introspective, and it's called introspection. And so he said, if you're using introspection, if you're thinking about thinking, then that's structuralism. So I want you to think of it this way. You're like, wait, didn't you just say that was introspection? Introspection is thinking about thinking. If you use introspection for psychology, that's structuralism. So here's an example. Here's an analogy. Addition is when you add things together. When you do addition, you're doing math. That's what introspection and structuralism is together. Math is the big topic. Structuralism is the big topic. Introspection is what you are doing. So math is the big topic. You're doing addition, which is math. You're doing introspection, which is structuralism. Okay. But later, William James comes along, and he writes. He doesn't do a psychology experiment, but he does write the first psychology textbook. And he came up with the idea of functionalism. Functionalism is what would have gone in the face of Wilhelm Wundt's how does that make you feel? He would say, no. It's not how it makes you feel. It's how it makes you behave. He cared about how does it make you function in real life. If you were to see a circle or hear a ball drop on the table, how does that make you function? How does that make you behave? So William James, what part of psychology does he care about? He cares about behaviorism. And just like, let's go back to our quick definition of psychology: the study of mental processes and behavior. If you had a name to go along with each of those things, behavior, who cares about behavior? That's William James. Who cares about mental processes? That's Wilhelm Wundt. So those are the very first two guys basically arguing. Psychology is how it makes us feel. No, psychology is how it makes us behave. Nowadays, we don't have to argue. We put both of those definitions, or both of those terms in the definition. So it's the study of both of those things. At the time, you kind of picked one thought or the other. You were either into Wilhelm Wundt's idea of structuralism, of how does that make you feel? Or you were into William James' idea of functionalism. How does it make you function? How does it make you behave? Okay. I don't want to give you guys too much today, so that's where I'm going to leave it as. We're going to get to the modern perspectives of psychology. In fact, I might actually have, instead of me talk about, I might have you read something that will be better than what I would have done, because sometimes I like to ramble and go back and forth and whatever. So we'll be talking about the modern perspectives of psychology next, because the old perspectives is that idea of functionalism and structuralism. Modern perspectives are different. They are the newer ones. People are not, oh my gosh, dog. People are now have more of a selection of how they view psychology. Instead of just two schools of thought, functionalism and structuralism, now we got a whole bunch. So that's where I'm ending today. Hopefully you learned a little bit about the two big ideas of psychology: behaviors and mental processes, the big debates in psychology, nature versus nurture, change versus stability, and then a couple of the foundations of psychology, of whether we used to drill holes in the head or follow the bumps on the skull, but now we classify it as a science, with Wilhelm Wundt doing the first scientific experiment. So that was it for today. Have a great afternoon, and I will see you guys later Bye.